In the story creation ecosystem, worlds are created by two separate, yet equally important groups. The world builders, who envision the world and its intricacies, and the storytellers, who bring their world to life. This is their podcast. In 2019, a crack world-building unit was sent to prison by a critics court for an inconsistency they didn't commit. These men promptly escaped from a maximum security blog page to an underground Discord server. Today, still wanted by the critics, they survive as builders of fortune. If you have a problem, if no one else can help, and if you can find them, maybe you can hire the WB team.
Um, yeah, so I did have a concept I want to go over.
Oh, I should turn my air conditioner off. That's loud.
I haven't heard anything yet. Or maybe it's just bothering you then.
Well, it's off now.
So, Gerb, take us away. What's
Yeah,
the concept?
so the concept is basically I'm trying to think how to explain it in a somewhat logical way. So basically the idea is that in that world they have a certain way of measuring not exactly intellect, but basically the idea is this. Basically, so in medieval times,
critical thinking.
So it goes back a bit, in where did the concept come from? In medieval times, there were often things that were considered like sorcery or dark magic or stuff like that, and in general, just considered more or less forbidden knowledge. Things you're very much not supposed to look into because they supposedly corrupt the mind. Which, in practice, really on most of these things was either people were scared of these things or they made the person, according to how, they evaluated it at least, they made that person unable to properly participate as a normal member of society. So, no. So that was the general gist of it. And then I was thinking about how there are a lot of things today that act in a fairly similar fashion to that. So for example, an example I like to give a lot about this is programming, because programming is really, really simple once you get the gist of it.
Yeah, you tell the computer what to do and it does it.
Yeah. And the thing about programming is really it's not about doing extremely complicated things as much as learning how to use very basic tools in very creative ways.
And being good at using Google.
Yeah. So basically the idea was in many ways that acts in a similar sense to forbidden knowledge, because people that learn how to program and learn how to do all this stuff, they usually start being kind of it's kind of hard for them to suddenly talk with other people normally about certain things because they think like a programmer and the other person doesn't necessarily. And if they try to explain to the other person, look, it's really simple, the other person's like, no, it's programming, it's complicated.
Or another example, I think, would be when you've actually studied creative writing, it's a lot harder to talk to people about stories and novels and TV shows and movies and things because you view them in a different way to most people.
Yeah. And then and then they go stop shitting on Harry Potter, and I'm like, but it's bad.
Yeah.
I mean, it has its good sides. I think you're just more analytical the more you look into stuff.
Harry Potter is very much a child's series that somehow got popular with adults. That's why it's perceived as bad. It's meant for kids.
I mean, it started for kids and then had to evolve somehow, and
it's
that's some growing pains in there.
building a jet on the basis of a paper plane.
That's
Like
pretty
the
apt
story. If you
comparison,
think
yeah.
about Harry Potter, it's an incredibly ignorant and racist society, which I find just fucking hilarious.
Yeah, that's yeah.
If you
Like if
think about it, it's like, holy shit, these people are like just caveman. Wow.
yeah, like if Voldemort ever went against mortals or muggles, sorry, muggles, he would just get slaughtered because muggles have guns.
And they're not afraid to use them.
I
Yeah.
mean, they should be
yeah,
able
the story,
to protect themselves from
that
guns, shouldn't they?
yeah, like
Not an army all firing guns at them at once.
there's just no way that Harry Potter, at least the original series, could be like just. I mean, the author certainly tried to retcon everything, but you know.
It's
Whatever.
after World War II. Like, worst case, they'll literally just nuke them.
Yeah.
Yeah, like
Although Voldemort was very clearly based on Hitler, so you know.
they could. Would be interesting to see
But
if
would
like
nuking really
actually
work? Because they can just pop
Yeah.
out of existence somewhere.
Even
They
if
can-
they,
It takes
like,
time
yeah.
for a
Oh,
nuke to
but
travel, so.
I remember there have been what inside the Wizard Society. There were theoretical attempts at going to the moon with magic. In one of the books, I think Hermione was talking about it, and like how either whoever went never came back, or they failed because air, and yeah, like they would be. I don't think the wizards would be capable of dealing with fallout. Yeah.
True,
there
but
are.
neither
Dirty
would
bomb
humans,
at,
so.
Just throw a dirty bomb.
Anyway, we're getting sidetracked already.
Yeah. We are.
so
Isn't this the motto of this show?
I mean, not if we
Yeah.
really have a prompt that someone wants to talk about.
So basically, it's like going back. I think like 3 levels of tangents, more or less. The idea is basically that, like, because of this very weird effect, like, you get this thing where, like, people that, like, have expertise in a certain field will often, like, these people often end up unable to talk with people that don't have an expertise in that field about anything, really, because, like, anything that is remotely related to that field, because they go, like, no, this is too complicated. But the thing is that this is not a thing that happens entirely just with, like, it's not something that only happens with, like, writing or programming or stuff like that. It's also something that happens with, for example, like, with even, like, more social interactions and stuff like that. Because you get people that, like, you get people from time to time that will look at things from the side and be like, why do you do this? Why do you do that? And so suddenly to them, like, for example, like, this is something that is becoming a lot more mainstream as of late, which is funny because it is and isn't, and it's a bit weird. But basically, like, the entire thing of, like, why buy, for example, brand clothing when we can just buy something that works for us, which is a surprisingly new attitude for many people. Even though, like, it makes complete sense, and a lot of people, because of that, have been doing that for quite a while. But then, like, again, it's this thing where a lot of people don't do it because they go at it, like, they go and look at it and they're like, oh, this is a brand, this is good.
I mean, brands emerge because they usually have some kind of selling pitch that people flock to initially, and then they
Yeah.
live off of the name. Sometimes, I mean, brands usually have a certain level of quality that you can expect. So
yeah, it's so like it's this weird thing because to a lot of people it looks so like it looks nonsensical of like why are these people buying these like brand stuff instead of just buying things that are good. And then on the other hand you get people that do buy these things and they're like, why are people not buying it? It's the brand. It's like, so what? It's the brand. So like this is for example something that like in many ways is like somewhat correlated to like the people that like so again like this is becoming less and less true over time because you know society changes unlike war but the idea is that like to a lot of people because they were looking at things more from the outside it seems nonsensical to buy these brand things and to a lot of people it seems completely sensical and like and that's just one example. There are a lot of examples where it's the other way around because generally speaking someone who is more of an outsider to something will usually look at it very differently from someone who is more of an insider in that field. So basically the idea was like knowing these things and like looking at these things from the outside does in a sense make you a bit like so initially the naming for this came from a mods for a game I play a lot with, which in that mod you're kind of like you're this mage and you learn and like you can learn basically different types of magic, and some of these things are considered like forbidden knowledge. It's like things that are more dark magic-y, and as a result they distort your mind a bit, and you can measure that level of warp of like how warped your mind is. And in there it's basically like the effects of that are usually something along the lines of like you start to distort the reality around you a bit and all the other mages look at you very weird and you also can't communicate with them really because you look at things from a fairly different perspective. So yeah, like that's where it all came from. And the idea is that like already in medieval times we had things like that where like we had these like forbidden knowledge, and yeah, like the idea was basically what if we could measure someone's tendency towards learning such like forbidden knowledge. Like what if we could measure their tendency to learning it, and as a result also the tendency to basically become like abnormal and like some people might consider them non-functional members of society, some people might consider them very important members of society. This gets a bit more complicated very quickly.
So,
But yeah, it was the idea of like what if we could measure that? Like, or not necessarily us, but like what if in a world from really fairly early on in like history they could measure like somebody's tendency to becoming like warped like that. Suddenly there will be an entire thing of like because many people will treat that like as knowing these like outsider things, it's like it makes you a dysfunctional member of society, so it's like it's a really bad thing for a lot of people, so they would very much avoid it, and it would seem to them like basically spelling their doom. And to other people it might be like, well, now I can do a lot of things that normal people can't, and I can think about things from like an outsider's perspective. So it will be this weird balance between the two where no one group can really be independent of the other. Because you need this outsider's perspective, but you also need people that are somewhat normal for society to function. Can't have everybody weird.
so the question for today is, how would a society look like who can do this, or what's
so
the
it's
question?
less one question. It's more a bunch of questions of like going through this. Like it's a it gets pretty weird pretty quick.
Well, starting with
So-
one question wouldn't be too bad.
Yeah. So I guess, like, in that case, the first question would probably be something along the lines of, like, so with such a society, first of all, where would it even make sense for it, like, for the first branching from our world to be? Because I do know very much that it's not going to be in our world for multiple reasons, and like also like a world that is probably not too dissimilar to ours, but is somewhat dissimilar to ours.
Um, is magic a thing in this world, or is it just this like a mental tendency of people?
So initially in the prompt, no, but then I looked at it and there is some sense in making magic real there, but not exactly in the classical sense as much as this is probably going to be the world. So basically, like a lot of my writing projects have these weird people running around different worlds and and trying to fix weird anomalies that are happening. So I looked at my notes for everything, and it does make sense that this would be the world where it all started. But really, that's there will be some magic probably, but that's probably going to be something that happens very late on into it, and is much less related to the basics of this concept and the time where I'm actually telling these stories. Eventually, they'll discover magic, but it will be a while after these stories.
Well, what you've described up to this point is the expert paradox.
Yeah, but the thing that interests me about this entire concept is that usually with this especially the expert paradox is very relevant when you look at things that are more work oriented and stuff like that, for example. But what I find really interesting is that you also get it in that case I wouldn't necessarily call it an expert, but you also get a very similar phenomena with people that are just more or less outside the loop on things in society, because they look at for example, for a lot of these people it's really hard to small talk, for example. So why are you talking about such insignificant things when there are such interesting things out there? And to a lot of other people they're why does every conversation have to be so deep? So it's this weird there's a third thing where the expert paradox extends to a lot more than just the professional fields. And I really don't see it mentioned a lot, which is kind of a shame because it is fairly important.
Well, then what if we referred to that kind of person who's just kind of outside of the loop of society generally as an anti-expert? So they don't have the common knowledge or common understanding that the rest of society has. So they would kind of just be an anti-expert.
Yeah, the idea is kind of basically they don't have that knowledge, but instead they have different knowledge in a way. It's so it's not exactly that, but I'm gonna pretend like it is. So there's the cognitive trade-off hypothesis. I think it's how it's called. Which basically goes something along the lines of it goes something along the lines of in order to develop certain things, humans have had to give up on certain in order to develop certain evolutionary benefits, humans have had to give up on other evolutionary things. So, for example, I think it's chimpanzees. God, wait, I forget which monkey it is exactly. They have picture-perfect memory, and they really need to be exposed to the picture they're looking at for less than a quarter of a second. And it's really weird. It was really weird for scientists at first because they were these monkeys are almost they're more or less our they're more or less our closest relatives in the monkey kingdom. like in the monkey like not kingdom, but like you get what I mean. Like the more or less the closest relative in terms of like a monkey species. And scientists were like, how do they have this memory? And like the hypothesis about it was that in order to develop language, we had to give up on certain advantages that they didn't. So they might not plan for the future and stuff like that, but they have like short-term memory that is ridiculously better than ours, and a few other things like that. So
Yeah, I just googled it. It's the chimpanzee.
yeah, yeah, like a lot of this prompt was thanks to binging Minefield and just going like, I can use this. Yeah, so the idea was basically, what if like, so basically the idea is initially they just discover this like tendency towards like this tendency towards forbidden knowledge, and then they go like, wait, if these people are like more likely to learn these things, that then make them kind of unable to communicate with people in their field, and that field can also obviously be like just social skills. So if they learn these things that make them an outsider on that, does that potentially give them some advantage over other people? Because if not, then why do these people keep getting bored? And the idea was basically like, there might be a use for this. And then they're like, yeah, there is a use for this. And then like intentionally making the split between our history more or less and theirs. Because the idea is like that there was enough time for many civilizations to try and run only on warped people or only on normal people or any weird mix in between. And most of it is documented. So, well, not perfectly, obviously. History is never perfectly documented. But there's enough about it that people in like the modern world know that there's use for both parties. But still, that doesn't like, even if they know that there's use for both parties, that doesn't mean that everybody treats everybody the same way. Hell no. And yeah.
So you're kind of having a thing that measures people's tendency to diverge from common consensus.
To me, it sounded more like it's a measurement of someone's propensity to be either a jack of all trades or like get invested into a certain field.
So I had to go bring tissues. Yeah. It's really cold here. So yeah, the idea of like being able to measure the divergence from normalcy, and then also because of that being able to like being able to see that, like, for example, this divergence does have its benefits, but also has like very, very, very clear disadvantages. And
what's
as a
normalcy defined as? Is it a
so the
hard
normalcy
value, or is it just a relative position to like?
The normalcy is defined more or less like not exactly like our world, obviously, but it's more like it's a lot closer to like the normal in our world, while the divergence is like it's not defined as weird, like as people that define themselves as weird, because like this is actually something that like I found it really funny when it was told, because it's such a funny story about just human nature and corporates knowing it better than people sometimes. Like corporations. Basically, so I went to this weird like introduction to a weird like national service kind of thing. It's weird. Like basically like volunteering before going to the army kind of thing. And in there, it wasn't aimed at artists, specifically visual artists. So you can imagine that they were aiming it at people that very much define themselves as weird and as different and as like away from the curve and all that stuff, and they pride themselves on being so different. And the instructor also used to be like that. And the instructor just went like, when I was your age, I was like, no, I don't want to buy brand clothing, and I don't want to do that, and I went entirely against the stream, and then he continues and is like, and I went so far against the stream that I just entered another side stream that was like, yeah, we're against the mainstream. And he was like, I was still buying like branded clothing just from different brands that were claiming to be rebellious, and I was still doing all these things because I was trying so hard to be different from the mainstream, and there were enough people doing that a little mainstream like arose for us. And then we all fell for the same things because it wasn't the mainstream, so we were sure that we were being unique in ourselves, and it was like, and that felt pathetic. And
So
yeah,
there's a term that was used quite often that kind of describes this quite well. A couple of years ago, I don't know if it was used elsewhere, but it was definitely used in Australia, of 12s. So 12e was not just defining people who were 12 years old, but it was most common in people who were 12 years old. It was kind of defining people who considered themselves to be edgy in such a way that they were actually a mainstream that was aside from the original mainstream. So what you described.
yeah.
So we in fact had a term for that.
We also had a term for that. We still use it very often. Our term is a lot like a lot funnier in its origin, I think. We call them Yilday Center or Center Kids. The idea is that like they're called that way because when such groups started in our country, they met up a lot in a very in a specific weird mall that is more or less a maze. The architect for that deserves to go to be jailed inside there. I don't think he's gonna be able to get out. So it's this weird mall, and they would meet up there a lot, and it's called Dizengoff Center. So it was like we called them Center Kids. And yeah, it was like they were all watching the same non-mainstream shows together and buying the same non-mainstream clothing together. And it was very funny to see that because a lot of them genuinely just wanted to be themselves, and they were like, I don't want to just be something that someone tells me, no, you're supposed to now do this and buy this clothing and stuff like that. But they just ended up falling into a different mainstream, and a lot of them were very unhappy, and they were like, I don't feel like myself with all this. But they didn't understand why. And really a lot of it was just linked to that.
I mean, ours did kind of come from a similar thing. It was that year 7 used to be in primary school. In 2015, it switched to being in high school. And all of the year 7 students who were now the first year 7 students ever to be in high school always thought that they were so different to everyone else. They were different to everyone in the entire high school, and they ended up being consistently similar to all of the other year 7s. And so that kind of got out of the school system, got into the general population. And so then everyone started referring to those kinds of people as 12s. Because year 7s were 12-year-olds.
That makes quite a lot of sense. And yeah, it was so basically the idea is when I was sitting in that weird again, I wouldn't call it seminar, but in that weird meeting, I was like, it baffled me for quite a while until I realized that I see why it happened to him, because his focus was on being different and not being himself. So that happened. It was kind of bewildering to me, because I wouldn't necessarily say that that I'm this example of a warped individual like that from the concept, but definitely I will say that I have a lot less tact on those things. And it was kind of bewildering to me at first, to see that a lot of the people were genuinely like wanted to just be themselves, but because they were so conscious of something, they were like, I don't want to be that, instead of I just want to be myself. So they just ended up being the opposite of that, which was still extremely predictable. And yeah, like video was like on that moment I was like, so I guess if I were to define what being like this warped individual is, it's not being different or weird, it's being like it's completely throwing aside any consideration for what is supposed to happen and looking at it from a completely logical standpoint. So yeah, like it's not being weird or different as much as it's just being almost impulsive and just going like, I want to do this, so I'm gonna do this.
Wait, the
I don't care. I
warped
just want to.
person is the impulsive one or the logical one now? Which
It's like, so instead of being like, I just want to go like instead of being like, I just don't want to be normal, it's like, well, I just want to do whatever the fuck I want. I don't care about if it's normal, if it's weird. I just want to do what makes sense in my mind.
Mhm.
So yeah, that was actually more or less when the idea started, and then I was like, over time, slowly figuring out more and more of it and how it's all gonna go. And here we are. Yeah. So was that?
Well, there's a fairly old quote that kind of goes into that. That I'm not sure if I agree with it, but it's a quote that people have said. If you're not a rebel by the age of 20, you've got no heart. But if you haven't turned establishment by 30, you've got no brains.
I mean,
So
Yeah.
there's some truth to that.
But I
Yeah.
think that just kind of goes into what you were saying very much.
Yeah.
Because that guy was he was a rebel by 20 because he was kind of anti mainstream but became part of a different mainstream, and then he was presumably establishment by 30 because he recognized that he was just not being himself.
I guess there's a
Yeah.
difference between trying to know yourself by contrasting with your environment and just knowing what you want because you want it.
Yeah.
Although I would make the point, it is easier to see yourself in contrast to other things. And you probably have to do that to some degree anyway.
Yeah. So really, that's what like this entire concept started with. And yeah, like so from there was more or less just like, they can measure the abnormality of people. So they can go like, this person is like fairly prone to be like to being abnormal like that, and like, and then they go like, some people will obviously be like, no, I don't want to be abnormal, I want to fit in. Some people will also go like, wait, so I can do some really cool things. Yeah, like it's this entire thing with like this entire thing with that, and then again, like, so you get some people that become like really, really important people with all that, and they go like, oh, I'm like, because like it was basically the idea of like, for example, with engineering, a lot of times, like, what you need to be a successful engineer is to know when to take a step back and look at things from a completely different perspective, one that might be considered really weird in some cases. So
I'd like to point out that engineering is actually very easy. It's
yeah,
the learning the science to go behind the engineering that's the hard part.
yeah, but like, I think like one of the better examples I think of that is like, basically when engineers discovered origami and they were like, this is amazing. Because they looked at it and they were like, so you're telling us that we can just like make these really weird contraptions and they're just gonna work because they can fold. And they were like, an origami artists were like, huh, we've never even thought about sending like something to space that folds. So it was like, it wasn't an idea that was born by like it wasn't an idea that was created by people just going like, oh, I'm just gonna stick to my box, like this is engineering, so I'm just gonna stick into engineering and like not touch anything else. It was people going like, these origami people, they're doing some interesting things. Wonder if we can learn a bit more about what they're doing.
These origami people are up to something.
Yeah.
So what you
So-
just described is cultural blending.
Yeah.
So it's something that has actually been stymied a lot by recent political movements surrounding cultural appropriation, as they call it.
Yeah.
It has actually been stymied a bit by that because you can't really have cultural blending if people are actively being in opposition, standing in opposition to it. Opposing
Yeah.
that's the word. People actively opposing it. Standing in opposition to, when there's just a single word for that, opposing.
Yeah, it is kind of relevant to that as well. And it was just so the entire idea is basically like this warp is not necessarily a bad thing. It's not like suddenly like warp means that a person will be like that a person will be really weird and like not cooperative with society whatsoever on anything. And it's like, no, it's more complicated. That person is going to be is very much going to be a part of society, but also at the same time they're going to go like, wait, like there's this thing we're not considering because insert reason here. How about we start considering it? And like,
That's
but
what
the conversation even
scientists
started
do.
looking like,
That's what scientists do.
that's what they want to do. A lot of them, like today, kind of try to stray away from that, which is kind of weird.
Well,
Because
depends
like,
on what kind of scientist you are.
yeah,
Like if you let's take an example of an applied physicist versus a theoretical or versus a mathematical physicist. An applied physicist will do things like, say, underwater acoustics. So they will find out what's affecting things under the water, what the things under the water are doing to affect things above the water. And instead of just learning about those things, they will actually offer solutions to any problems being caused and applications of things that they discovered that weren't initially problems, and they're still not problems, but they might have applications. Whereas a mathematical physicist will just sit there and go, I want to know what happens when we smash these two particles together. I don't care how we'll use it. I'm just going to smash two particles together. You can deal with it.
yeah,
I mean, they don't necessarily have to smash them together. They just think about what will happen if they were to be smashed together.
And then they write a program and run a simulation on a supercomputer.
yeah,
But they don't try to apply it in any way. They don't keep a lookout for things that could potentially be applied. They just keep on learning. That's what they want to do. They just want to keep on learning. Whereas an applied physicist, say in underwater acoustics, or what else is there? Most applied physicists actually do things to do with the ocean, weirdly. Or radio signals, like say satellite radio signals or something like that. So
yeah,
they will keep a lookout for things that can actually be applied, hence the term applied physicist.
One
yeah.
question I would have about your prompt there is there some sort of like self-fulfilling prophecy in there? Like if you get tested for it and you get the result. First of all, are these results 100% accurate, and how long does it take, like, to measure this? I think this would influence how the whole world develops.
Yeah. So the idea is that basically the tendency to do to learn such forbidden knowledge is that is what they're testing, and so it is a bit less self-fulfilling. But at the same time, it's the same thing with somebody being for example at risk for certain diseases.
So
Sure,
does it spit out a percentage or something?
it's probably going to be more along the lines of not as exactly a power level, obviously, but something more along the lines of that.
So more qualitative.
Yeah, it's going to be you have this you have more or less so for example someone would be you have a very weak tendency to developing these things. It could be very normal throughout your life, and someone is gonna be you're basically the avatar. It's that's how I plan for it. And again, it's a thing where they're not exactly gonna be and they're not gonna be weird for the sake of being weird, or outsiders for the sake of being outsiders. At least most of them. Some of them obviously will be. But it's gonna be more on the sense of we're gonna be asking weird questions, why are you doing that? And they're gonna sound more and more like Socrates as time moves on. It's why are you doing that? I don't know. But why are you doing that?
So I'm gonna draw a popular culture parallel because you mentioned Avatar. I'm gonna bring up Azula and Zuko. Because Zuko definitely had far more of a propensity to actually think through things, think critically, whereas Azula just generally followed whatever her father told her to do, even though she still also had a tragic backstory as well, because you have to if you're on Last Airbender.
So,
yeah,
Azula's actually an interesting
requirement. It's a legal requirement of being a character on Last Airbender.
Yeah. Azula's an interesting example, actually, because she did have a tendency to think through things less. She was not any less logical as much as she was if something was oh, my father is the king and he said this, I'm just gonna go with it. It's not gonna be oh wait, maybe this is a bit stupid.
Yeah, because she was absolutely strategically a genius.
Yeah, she was far smarter than really most of the other people in the cast.
Yeah. However,
I say most because Iroh was a thing.
Yeah, because Iroh was yeah. But she didn't actually think critically.
Yeah.
She thought logically, but not critically.
Yeah, and even if
she was creative as well, but not critical.
Yeah. Even if she knew that, for example, something she wouldn't even try to to consider thinking about certain things critically. She was just there, more or less. And these things were also there.
And to be forced into thinking critically, she basically had to be smacked over the head with it, which was pretty much in the final episode when Ozai went, "I'm making you Fire Lord," and she went, "Yay!" And then he went, "And I'm making myself Supreme Master of the Universe." And that was the bit where Ozai went full Mark Hamill's Joker, where she finally actually twigged. Went, "Oh, I should actually think critically about this. I'm being played, but I'm still gonna stand by him because I haven't thought critically for the rest of my life, so why start now?"
Yeah. Yeah, in a way that there are similarities in there. Yeah. we- Yeah, so like with the prompt, obviously, like there's gonna be like an entire thing of like how do I balance a lot of these things, like not in terms of like power scaling, obviously that's not a problem here, frankly. But like, how do I balance it without it basically being like, so you have the superhumans and then you have the weaklings with something slightly.
Well, that's the thing. You don't have superhumans or weaklings.
Yeah.
You have effectively. I would say that you have thinkers and tradesmen,
Yeah.
or inventors and tradesmen, maybe something like that. But obviously, you wouldn't need to name them anything. In fact, you wouldn't need to name them at all, really. But basically that's what you have. So I think there are three things that could occur from this situation. One is bigotry. So bigotry against one of the groups, either the critical group or the standard group. There would be bigotry one way or the other. The second option is worship. People might be hero worshipped for thinking critically.
So yeah, it's a weird thing because like if we look back on our world, for example, we kind of have both.
We do, yeah.
Because we have like this thing, like I still look back at it and like I find it bewildering how being smart was an insult, and like in elementary school.
Nerd, you're such a nerd. Okay, thank you.
And I was just like, so basically like, so you're trying to insult me by saying that I can think better than you.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, yeah.
See where it gets you.
You have
Yeah.
a brain. How dare you?
Yeah, and but at the same time, you also get like, and this is actually one of the things that worries me on like about science a lot more than, for example, like the inaccessibility of science. It's the fact that the academia, like this sort of like,
Elitism.
yeah, like the academic elitism that is just rising in popularity so much.
That's true, but I would have to say that it's actually kind of distilled compared to what it was, say, in the 17th century, for example.
Oh, obviously.
So, like Shakespeare and that. Shakespeare was
Shakespeare is a weird thing. Some people claim he never actually existed.
But like around Newton, Shakespeare, like the middle, the 1500s to the 1700s, that kind of 300-year period.
Yeah.
There was a lot of academic elitism then. And I would say that probably around since the 1990s, elitism has been increasing again in science, but it has been decreasing since probably about 1800 to 1990.
Yeah. But it's this thing where like back then it was like, oh, the commoners just don't know anything, and now it's more like, oh, these commoners don't even deserve the ability to govern themselves, even though we're a democracy, because they're not smart enough for it. Trust us.
No.
Yeah, it's so it's like there will obviously be like elite, like there'll be feelings of superiority from both sides, because we also have that in our world. You have like in academia, a lot of times you have the people that are more critical thinkers and more prone to looking at things from the outside, and they go like, anyone that hasn't passed through academia is an idiot.
Yeah, I think we can actually make a comparison to how people treat the pandemic. Because there are three groups of people, very much three groups of people. One group of people goes, I have accumulated enough knowledge through the internet, so this is just an average person, any single person. I have accumulated enough knowledge through the internet and that we have so much cumulative knowledge over thousands of years of human civilization that I have the ability to mold my own reality by selectively choosing pieces of information. That's one group of people. They're the bigotry faction, the people who are kind of very tunnel vision, who look at all of the accumulated knowledge of humanity and go, I am going to take this bit and
I
ignore
want
all of the
this.
rest.
I want this one.
So that's one group. Group number 2 out of 3 is people who just blindly follow. So scientists say, well, not necessarily scientists, but let's say governments in this case. Governments say, you must do this, and they go, yes, sir, I shall do it. I shall not question you. If you are revoking my human rights, I do not care.
It shall be done, my lord.
Yes. Your will shall be done. You are my lord. Thank you, master. But that's the second group. And then the third group is the majority, I would say. They're the people who actually look at all of the knowledge that's available to them and they consider it. They go, okay,
Yeah.
I'm seeing this, I'm seeing this. People are giving me information from all sides. I'm actually going to think over it and make up my own mind. And those are the 3 factions of people we have within the pandemic.
Yeah. And like, so there's suddenly that, and like one of the things I find like the funniest about all of this is like, so like out of kind of curiosity mostly, I looked into like at some point I looked a bit into like anti-vax and where it started, because I was like, everybody always attributes it to that one like crooked research like from the 80s or 70s or something. I was like,
1991.
oh, it's not correct. It was like everybody always attributes it to that one study, but I was like, there's no way it all attributes to that. And then you discover like,
wasn't that study falsely done anyways, like under non-standard
It was, yeah. There were
procedures?
11 authors, and most of them have retracted their names from the paper, including the first author. When the first author retracts their name, you should be worried.
How
Yeah.
many levels of irony are we now in? Like, the study is very old, very irrelevant, and most of the people that did it do not support it anymore. Like,
yeah, and that's
three,
before you
three
even consider
levels
the
of
fact.
just.
And we have also had a study of every child born in, I think it was Finland or the Netherlands, something or other, in one European country in a 5-year period that found no statistical evidence of vaccinations causing any issues.
And again, on top of that, it was also discovered at some point that like the research was very much like pretty much paid for by a company that wanted vaccinations to not be as big of a deal as they were.
Yeah.
So that was obviously a problem, but I was like, there has to be more to this fear that people have from vaccinations than just that. So I was looking into it a bit out of, again, morbid curiosity. And honestly, like, it's one, like, I think that the thing, like, the sentence that summarizes my feelings about it, like, in the best way possible, is I'm frustrated to have to agree with these idiots on some things. I'm very frustrated to have to agree with them. But, like, for example, there was, like, so, for example, like, in many third world countries, there's actually a much bigger incentive for them to be anti-vax, because there have been some pretty inhumane things carried out under the guise of vaccination campaigns, and they're like, how do we trust that
like,
this time it's regulated?
Chemical sterilization has been done under the
Yeah.
guise of vaccination, historically, yes.
And backed by the World Health Organization, which was just like, what the fuck?
Yeah, that's a very dark scenario. It has happened, so yeah.
Yeah, and that was like the thing where I was like, okay, so people always go like, Bill Gates, Bill Gates, Bill Gates. And I'm like, he was a part of this. Okay, I understand now where the name came from. And like, obviously, like, I don't think vaccinations are bad after all this. And that's probably the biggest difference in the conclusions I drew from all this than a lot of the people were. I don't think this makes vaccinations bad. It makes unregulated vaccination terrible.
Yeah, what happens there, I think, is a slippery slope fallacy. So they have recognized that in one case study, A led to Z. And so they now say A will inevitably lead to Z, therefore A cannot be allowed to happen.
Yeah. And I mean, it is a little bit hard to look at it and not be a bit concerned when you have people like very much like this is one of the things like I wish I had a good explanation for why this happened, but there was some people might call it a slip up, some people might call it like very much a honest thing, but like there was the very famous TED talk that Bill Gates gave about vaccinations that has resurfaced in everybody's YouTubes now that COVID is happening. And in that talk, he says something that is a bit concerning because he very much he talks about vaccinations and them being being used as population control, and that is a bit concerning because that's like when you think about life-saving technology, you don't initially call it population control. That is a very concerning way to call it, and it's like it's funny to look at all this because whenever you even mention it near some people, especially like the more these people are related to like for example, so my brother's girlfriend, she is a biologist, and when you mention any of these things near her, she goes like, "Conspiracy. There's been a conspiracy," and it's like, but you can't ignore a lot of these things, and that's why I hate agreeing with the idiots representing this thing. They're stupid. They're absolutely stupid. They're going about the arguments in extremely stupid ways. But at the same time, we do have to, at the very least, like, we do have to face the arguments of like they're raising, even if not the arguments that they're directly raising. There are arguments though that are concerning.
Yeah, even though they are absolutely making a slippery slope fallacy, jumping straight from A to Z, the fact is, in specific cases, the other 26 letters have happened. Our other 24 letters have happened. The other 24 have happened at some point, and so that should probably be addressed. However, it is very unlikely that we will manage to get from A to Z again.
Yeah. And on top of all that, like, the thing I find funniest about it is, like, a lot of them go, like, so vaccination is bad, and like, there's a far simpler solution, which is just, like, regulate them in a way that makes sense. Don't get me wrong, governments are not exactly the most trustworthy thing ever.
Yeah, because they're run by people, and people have agendas.
Yeah.
I did indeed just quote Captain America Civil War.
Yeah, but like at the same time, we can very much just go like, so there are these problems that can arise when things are not regulated. Then we should regulate them very carefully, and then we can actually make this work.
You mean like guns?
Yeah. It's like guns, I think, are kind of a funny thing because they are a lot more complicated than both sides make them. And it's so funny to look at it. And I think that is actually kind of like one of the things I do think like the warped people in this prompt are gonna be are gonna have much more colorful opinions on. It's all these issues of guns, for example. Because it's far more complicated issue than a lot of people make it seem.
So they would probably be more likely to take a middle ground in many of these debates that people often view as black and white.
Yeah, because there rarely is something that is objectively bad. And even if something is objectively bad, usually if something is objectively bad, it just means that somebody's framing something improperly, more than anything.
Genocide is objectively bad.
Yeah. That is true. But then at the same time, when you have people calling everybody they don't like a Nazi, or a commie, on the other hand, that also happens. When you have that, then sure, if the person was actually a proper Nazi or a proper communist, there would be some very serious problems with a lot of it. but then the question has to be asked: are they really? And that's like that's the thing. Well, like things are often misframed, not necessarily in the like when things are misframed, it's not necessarily in the like, oh, don't get like, oh, it's like genocide isn't bad. It's like genocide is bad, but that person isn't supporting genocide.
Yeah.
You're making that assumption. And like,
You
yeah,
are,
because
you
guns
are
are, and
moving
it's,
the goalposts.
yeah, because guns are again like a really fascinating thing when you look at it from outside, especially because in our country, like, it's not really something that is discussed nearly as much.
Your country is
Um,
an active war zone. Of course, guns aren't discussed that much.
Yeah, but at the same time, we also have gun laws that are. It's funny because, in many ways, for a lot of people, it's actually easier to get guns in here. But nobody talks about it because it's not considered a patriotic thing in here, and it's like it's not considered part of the national identity. It's just people carrying guns because they want to feel safer, and in many cases, they very much need the like. They're not just making it up in many cases.
Yeah, they're going, I live in a war zone. I would like to not get warred to death.
Yeah. I mean, considering the fact that like my great grandpa got assassinated, then yeah, definitely. Like it is very much a thing that is like in public conscience here. So yeah, like there's this thing where like I think like in this world with like all the like with these warped individuals are gonna be a lot more nuanced on certain issues because of such things, because they go like, well, the answer's not that simple. Like, they go like, yeah, vaccinations can be bad when you have a gremlin administering them and not actually and not actually regulating it.
So I
In fact.
think that in the instance of your prompt, what will happen is that the I will choose what knowledge I want faction and the I will just blindly follow faction will be far more prevalent than they are in actual modern society.
Yeah.
So it'll look, kind of when you look in the comments section of anything posted by a large fandom,
Yeah.
like you see haters and sycophants. That's what you see. You pretty much never see someone who's actually thinking. That's
Yeah,
what I think. That's what I think your
actually
society might look like.
yeah. There was actually a thing like a very good example of that of the thing you mentioned that happened really not so long ago. It's been like unfolding over the past few weeks. It's an entire saga about a speedrunner accused of cheating in a speedrun.
Dream, yeah.
Yeah. Which is funny because like at least initially it was extremely crazy. Like at some point, obviously more evidence surfaced, and now people have been able to make more like sensical judgments. Doesn't mean they have.
I read both papers that were actually put out for that because I have somewhat of a background in statistics.
Yeah.
And I would like to say that Dream's scientist has no idea what he's talking about.
Yeah, that was actually addressed in like, so he was talking about it in like a certain YouTuber basically like made fun of him like extremely, and then at some point like they were like Dream was like, hey, I did actually like the way you look at things. How about we sit down and talk things properly? Because you seem like a person that actually listens to logic. So they did sit down and talk about it. And it's like basically most of that paper, like of the initial paper that Dream's statistician published, was very much rushed, which is one of the reasons for all this. And he did put out then like after that a corrected paper where he actually had time to sit over things and like go over feedback and stuff. That was a lot more.
So there was
sensitive.
more of a peer review process.
Yeah, because it had to be rushed initially, which is something that they both regretted. Which is why they were like, yeah, we'll also make one that is less rushed and can actually be reviewed properly.
Yeah.
And like, so looking at all the like the initial statistics were like bollocks. Like the initial statistics were bollocks, but then at the same time, yeah, the statistics that he had are kind of ridiculous. And like I think like he actually made a very good argument about it, where it was like, the statistics are extreme. Like he said, like I can't say to you like, oh, I obviously didn't cheat, because even if I cheat, like if I cheated or if I didn't cheat, I'm gonna say the same thing. So it was like, I can't tell you like suddenly now, oh yeah, like just trust me, like I didn't cheat. I was like, I know I didn't cheat, so I'm not gonna say like I'm not gonna admit falsely. But it was like the actual statistics are sensible enough that there is that leeway in like saying, well, this is improbable, but I do believe that this happened.
Yeah, I mean, I don't personally really care whether he cheated or not, just because his
Yeah.
content is entertaining. I'm gonna keep
Exactly.
watching it.
Yeah, which is like, it is something that like a lot of people had like as a conclusion from all of it. But then like again, you also saw all the people in the comments, which was especially funny because none of them really understood statistics.
Yeah.
Going like, he obviously cheated, he obviously didn't cheat, or like anyone that talked with him like, he's manipulating you. You only agree with him because he's a master manipulator. That's like, what the
Yeah.
fuck is wrong with you?
Or you only agree with it because you are a dream stan.
Yeah, I was like, no. Some people can use like the brain. I know. Surprising concept. But yeah.
But the majority of the people in all the comment sections are either just going, I adore Dream, or I hate Dream. I just want to hate people who are successful, or I just want to randomly support this person. No one who's just
Yeah.
actually thinking critically about it.
Which is really funny because like also the entire thing really started with that. The entire thing started with someone who was like basically going like, oh, this is like I can like this is a very popular like streamer. I can make this accusation and try to grow my channel, and that's how the accusation started.
Yeah.
Which was like, on hindsight, yeah, they found something very peculiar, but it was not started like in any way in a pure intent, which is.
I'm gonna say something really very controversial now. That
So
this
far.
also happens when major celebrities have just single sexual assault allegations made against them.
Yeah.
When people just want money, or they just want to bring down someone famous. When it's something like 30 allegations, you kind of go, okay, there's probably something up. They probably did it. When it's one, you have to kind of question, did they or didn't they?
Yeah. I think like a good example of that a lot of people go like, if you even mention it that it is a two-sided example, a lot of people will go like, how dare you're this and this and that. But like I think a good example is the Johnny Depp allegations that happened recently.
Yeah. Because it was
It's
one individual.
Yeah, and furthermore, there's also very much evidence out there, like that was presented in court, that there were ulterior motives at play, and like it's honestly a bit concerning.
Yeah. So that is one of the cases where people either just go, no, I support this man, or no, I do not support this man, for absolutely no reason, instead of just going, this is not my place, I'm going to stay out of this because I don't have all the information.
Yeah.
Which is what the general public should do in this instance. Because they should, well, in that instance, they should just go, I do not have all the information, I'm not going to weigh in on it.
Yeah. But the general public is the general public is made out of humans, and humans are not the smartest thinkers.
Yeah.
So yeah.
So yeah, I think that in your society, the way it would develop is that you have people who are bigoted against the critical thinkers, as I'll call them, and who will just say, I am going to select the knowledge that I want, and this is how I'm going to live. And then there will be people who just look at the critical thinkers and accept everything they say at their word. And then there's going to be a very small minority of people who think for themselves, as opposed to, in today's society, because everyone is capable of critical thinking. Everyone is.
Yeah,
So the majority of people do think for themselves. But if you have some system that tells you your propensity for critical thought, people are just going to stop thinking critically.
exactly. That is actually kind of like, it is kind of what I was going for too, where this was like that at the very least initially it will cause something like that until at some point there might be a change and they'll go like, this is not good. And also, like, another thing I was thinking is how there'll probably be this weird thing, like, I think these people will actually find themselves in academia a lot less than in our world. Because suddenly it's not going to be, oh, you just, like, you have a functional brain, like, that you can use well, you just go to academia. It's going to be more along the lines of, like, they go, well, people don't like it when I use their brain. I'm just not gonna go to academia because then, like, all the people there are gonna be like, so you're gonna get this weird thing where you have a lot of people in academia that are not like warped, and as a result, they have like they look at these warped individuals and they're like, oh, they have it easy, they don't belong here.
Possible. So you
Yeah.
might have some societies where, like some branch societies from that, where all of the people in academia are just regular people, and other branch societies where all of the people in academia are exclusively warped people, as you call them.
Yeah. So yeah, like there's like, there's on that front. And yeah, like I think there will be a lot of interesting stories to tell in this entire thing as well, because like there's gonna be a lot of you get these. I think what will probably happen with a lot of these people is that they will start just operating from the shadows, because it's so much easier to operate from the shadows.
And I think
like
potentially something else that might actually arise from this measurement system is a wider propensity for people to suggest communism. The reason for that being that you can measure someone's propensity for critical thinking. And so there will be some people who try to take advantage of that and say, oh, I think that people should be specifically put into these jobs based on their qualitative propensity for critical thought. So I think communism will be suggested more often in your world.
Let's not tell that to Mirand. Yeah. In general, I think they'll probably give way to a lot more like authoritarianism than in our world. Because
I still think communism would be rejected, of course.
Yeah.
Just because I think everyone at some point in their life will think of communism, will come up with it, because it's a logical thing that everyone will come up with.
Yeah, that only fails because it's made for humans.
Yeah. And then every single logical person will also reject it after they think about the potential consequences and fallout from it.
Yeah.
So I'm talking about children. Children will always come up with the idea.
Yeah.
Like they'll just go, people are all just buying things and there are people in poverty and stuff. Why don't we just give everyone everything? And just say, well, that's communism. That's the concept of communism.
Yeah. And then you go like, and communism also has its issues.
Yeah. It has
slight
these
issues.
This is why it doesn't work.